And we're going to begin this morning a new series. And we spent our summer in the Proverbs talking about wisdom. And this morning we're going to start a series called The Hard Sayings of Jesus. Now, the hard sayings of Jesus, they're hard in a couple of ways. One of the ways, right, that they're hard sayings is they're hard to understand. Sometimes when Jesus says stuff, we're like, what did he really mean? And the other half, sort of the other side of the coin, is that even once you understand what it was that he meant, it's hard to do. Jesus is a controversial figure throughout history, right? I mean, for 2,000 years, there has been debates. Who was he? How much God was he? How much man was he? Was his mother this? Was his dad that? Was his, did he have brothers? And did he really die? Was there really a tomb? But the sort of universally acceptable thing about Jesus is that he was a great teacher. So we're going to look at some of those teachings, but I think that in there we will certainly see some of who Jesus actually is. Now, there's a joke. I don't always start with jokes. That's not usually my style for those of you that are new, but there's a joke that is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is, one bite at a time. So as we think about this morning's hard saying, in some ways what we're going to find out is that this is the sort of thing that you've got to eat one bite at a time. And we're going to take it and we're going to sort of break it into tiny little pieces and chew it. Don't try and swallow these whole. Don't choke this morning. That would be embarrassing for you. We're in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 14, if you have a Bible and you want to join me there. Gospel of Luke, chapter 14. Jesus is about to do some talking. But if we start in verse number 25. Now great crowds accompanied him. So you get the sense, right? Here's Jesus. He's walking along. He's got his friends. He's got his apostles, the people that are, right, gathered around him. And there's great crowds. And he turns and says to them, he says it to the great crowds, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, point number one, hating, right? Because what we're saying to ourselves is, how do we hate our parents? Why do we hate our parents? The first bite this morning is that hating isn't an option. Now, right, verse 25, there's these great crowds. Jesus has got his, what we would think of as the inner circle, the elite, the apostles are gathered around Jesus. But this isn't a lesson. This isn't a statement where Jesus huddles the closest and the inside crowd and the second-tier Christians and says, hey, if you want to graduate to platinum level, then you've got to do this. What he says is to everyone, including all of the random crowds, any hanger-on and passerby, this is what following me looks like. See, ultimately, what we're going to be discussing this morning is discipleship. This is what being a disciple, this is what being a follower of Jesus requires. Hating your mom, hating your dad. Now, there's been a lot of talk about discipleship, but it can often feel, discipleship talk can often feel, right, like there are levels. I know that none of us in this room play video games on our phone, but if you did, right, you know that often when you play so much time or so many, right, you're always trying to get to the next level. You get enough points and you go from bronze to silver and silver to gold and gold to platinum and then platinum to some other random thing that they think makes you more valuable, diamond or something weird, right? And they're always, right, they're trying to spur you on. Boy, if you would just give us this $9.99, at least maybe it's just my kids, right? If you can get the newest level of the latest crazy game. That's not what Jesus is saying. In fact, I think people who present anything that looks like a faith like that there's these weird levels of it, have misunderstood what it is that Jesus is saying. He's not saying there's sort of regular Christians, the ones like you, right, who come to church and maybe they give a little bit of money, but if they've got something else maybe more important going on, then they stay home. But if you're really serious, if you get enough gold stamps in your card, then you get this platinum black card. I don't know if platinum's actually black. I made that up. We don't have platinum cards around here, in case you're worried. Right? That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying, listen, this is it. He flattens it out. Discipleship for everyone, all of you, anyone who comes to me. That's what it says in verse 20. If anyone comes to me. All the followers, every disciple. This is what it looks like. You have to hate your mom, and hate your dad, and hate your spouse, and hate your kids, and hate your brother, and hate your sister. Now we'll get to what that means here in just a second, but catch that he's saying it's for everybody. That's bite number 1. Every follower is called to full, complete, sacrificial discipleship. It is what being a Christian means. This is what it is. He's giving us, this is what following me looks like. Hate your parents. Almost all of our lives come with hidden costs. Right? If you buy a car on the day you actually go to make your payment, all of a sudden, right, there's taxes and there's fees and there's destination charges. You go rent a hotel room. All of a sudden, right, they've charged you for the bottle of water that you drank and whether or not you did or did not open the safe, and they've charged you for like turn down fees, right? Everything has hidden fees. Jesus doesn't come with hidden fees. Jesus goes, listen, don't be under any false impressions about this. This costs hating your parents. It's not like, get in, I promised you this great and spectacular and glorious, prosperous life. And oh yeah, by the way, once you're in, now in order to advance to the next level, it costs you something more. No, Jesus goes, listen, it's going to cost you everything. Right up front, all of you is the cost. He doesn't look at the crowd and promise something different. He tells them the cost it's going to be. This is for everybody. Anyone who wants to follow and be my disciple. There is no hidden thing. No twist once you're on the inside. Hate your parents. Hate your mom. Hate your brother. That's bite number 1. Let's talk about bite number 2. Chew on that one for a while, right? Hating is not just not optional. Hating is unpredictable. Jesus is going to walk down. When Jesus gives this list, right, all of the ands, hate his own father and his mother and his wife and his children and his brothers and his sisters and his own life, what was he saying? What is Jesus capturing the full range of? This is what being a good citizen, a good person in his day involved. Love your family. That was it. You took care of your parents, right? You didn't move away. When it was time for a wife, you kind of looked at your parents and said, boy, I'd really like a wife. And your parents would go out and they would find you one. And when they found that one, you married that one. And then you had lots of babies. And the grandparents were involved. And you all lived in proximity, and you worked with your dad every day, right? And you hung out with your mom every day. It was this tight little family was everything. It was your retirement plan and your occupation and it was everything. It was your life. This was the best life that someone in the first century could imagine. This was the pinnacle. What we think, right? We call it the American dream here culturally. This was the Jewish dream. A good, healthy, right relationship with my mom and my dad and my spouse and my kids and my brothers and my sisters, right? Because they also, these big families were all in relationship, all working together and living together and raising cattle together. And this was their lives. And so when Jesus comes and steps on this toe, it's not an accident. It's not a mistake. He knew exactly what it was that he was saying to them. Jesus looks at all of that and says, you have to be willing. If you want to follow me, you have to be willing to hate that. The accepted and the expected and the natural things that everybody else is holding up and going, this is the course of your life. The plans and dreams and expectations that not just all of those people, right? We can almost get that, like our moms might have unhealthy ideals and our dads might have unhealthy ideals and our kids have unhealthy ideals and our brothers and sisters might have but he doesn't stop there. He goes right down to the spot. He goes, even your own life, even your own plans, your own expectations, all of it. Jesus is saying, don't come to me with an agenda for your life. Don't come with your outlines and your timelines and your expectations that I'm going to just fill in over here on the flow chart somewhere. Right? And for a lot of us, it's, boy, once I get this together, once I've made this much money, once I start to have kids, once I, then Jesus, then you can be the priority. When it's convenient, when it works. Jesus goes, no, you got to hate all of that stuff. Don't come to me because you want comfort and happiness and fulfillment, Jesus is saying. Don't come to me because you've got it all figured out and you want me to give you the stuff on your list. Jesus says following me means all of that other stuff gets hated. Now we're going to see this over the next several weeks, but Jesus is often intentionally provocative, right? Jesus knows that this is going to step on toes. He knows that saying, hate your mom, hate your dad, hate your wife, hate your kids, is something that is designed to poke. You're supposed to look up and go, what? What are you talking, like, what? It's what he wants. He wants us shocked. He wants us asking what it means. Jesus is saying, don't come to me because I'm the thing that's relevant, or I'm the thing that's thrilling, or I'm the thing that's exciting. Don't come to me because you want to be this great citizen. Don't come to me because you think the society needs you to be. You have to come. Here's what he's saying. You have to come to me for me. You have to come to the spot of following, of discipleship, with no other expectation than you get me. Jesus is relevant. He is thrilling. He is fulfilling. He does bring peace and joy and rest. He does give us the ability to have redeemed and restored relationships with all of the people in that list, including ourselves. But that's not why we come. It's not why we follow. We follow to get him and him alone. We follow because he is the Lord, because he is the way, he is the truth, he is the only source of life. See, we want to come going, I want some assurances. Right? I want to know that if I give you this much, maybe even Jesus, I want to know that if I give you all of it, that on the other side, I'm going to get what I want. I'm going to get what I expect. And until you're willing to say that I'm all yours, Jesus, you aren't actually a disciple. That's what discipleship is. Discipleship is going, you get all of me. I hate all of that stuff, and all I want, Jesus, is you. Bite number 2. What about bite number 3? Hating is not optional. Hating is unpredictable. Hating is deeply emotional. What Jesus is saying, when we think of hate, right? When we think of hate, we think of this like animosity. We think of active hostility. We think of working, right? When we see that person, they're the one we want to punch in the nose. But we know, right? We know that what Jesus says to us is what? Love your enemies. What Jesus says is, Love yourself. Jesus says something, and so there's this, right? Like we said last week, there's a paradox. Jesus said we're supposed to forgive even the people who have wronged us. How can we hate those people? The word for hate here can mean, and occasionally does mean in Scripture, animosity, active hostility. But there are also spots where hate means comparatively. That we can look at the way we think about this, and compared to the way we think about something else, it looks like hate. Let me give you a Bible example. Genesis, I think it's chapter 29. There's a guy, his name is Jacob. Jacob has 2 wives. One's named Rachel and one's named Leah. And in the chapter 29, there's a couple different spots where it says that he loved Rachel and he hated Leah. Now here's the thing, he didn't ever show open animosity, right? He wasn't nasty to her. He didn't give her the prickly bed. He didn't make her sit at some other table from where he sat and ate. Like that was not, it wasn't, what it was saying was compared the way, when you looked at his love for Leah, compared to the way that he loved Rachel, it looked like hate. So what Jesus is saying is this: love me. Jesus is saying, love me. Now there's all kinds of love. Right? We talk about those loves around here sometimes. Jesus, I think it's really interesting that when Jesus gives us the list of things to hate, he's almost listing the types of love. Right? There's a love that we have for our parents. That familial love. That's appropriate. There's a love that we have, right? It's on a different level. There's a scale. There's a different love, a different type of love that we have for our spouse. Our love for our spouse compels us to do things that we, right, because we're not weird, would never do with our mom and dad. We have a love that for our children, that again is different than the love that we have for our parents and the love that we have for our spouse, but it's still love. There's a love we have for our brothers and sisters, and as we think right into the community of faith, how's that often how we even refer to one another in this room? Brothers and sisters, we're in relationship with one another. It's as though Jesus is going, everybody, moms, dads, spouses, kids, brothers and sisters, friends, all of it. All of those other kinds of love pale in comparison to the way you're supposed to love me. Jesus took all of those types of love that we might have and said, I want you to have some love that is greater. That when you look at the love you have for me, everything else in comparison looks like hate. It's so distinguished, it's so different. Often what people want, and sometimes even what gets presented, is the idea of sort of this ranked list of loves. Right? And we went God at number 1, and then we go our spouses at number 2, and our kids are at number 3, and it depends on where you're at and who's making the list, but sometimes we go our church here, and our job, and maybe our neighbors, and our friends, and we've got this list. And it's as though every time we come to the list, we go, okay, well, where do they fit? Who gets my priority? But what we often do, right, is we treat it more like a percentage, like a pie. So like God gets, maybe he gets the majority, right? I mean, he's at like 51%, and so most of my time, most of my energy, most of my stuff, he should get. But then my spouse gets, she might get 25 or 30%, and then my kids got a little slice, and right? And then when somebody's not on the pie, we just kind of go, I'm sorry, you're not on my ranked list. That's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying there is no list. Jesus says, love me. And that's it. I've been married. Meg and I have been married now 22 years. And allow me to assure you that if I walk in tomorrow, tonight, this afternoon, she's not in the room so I can get away with saying this, right? And Meg's like, well, like, you got a text message on your phone, who's that from? And I'm like, oh, you don't have to worry about her, she's number 2. You like, I love you the most. You get the most of me. I mean, in the rank list, don't worry, your wife number 1. I mean, yeah, she's number 2 and she gets some of my time and, like 2 nights a week and just don't do you know what? My wife is not going to think that. That's not a good idea. I will not be here next week if that's what happens. Right? We can see that. Meg is all there is. There is no woman in second place. There's no runner-up. There's nobody in the wings that's waiting, hoping that they're going to compete to get to the top, right? That's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is going, I'm everything. He's saying to me, even, right? You just heard me speak very nicely about my wife, and that is genuinely how I feel about her. Jesus is going, even in that, compared to the way you love me, Meg's not even on the list. There is no other thing on the list. This is a demanding test. This is a high standard, right? This is a hard saying. It's hard to understand on one level, and it is hard, right? You should be right now, your jaw should be working this, chewing on this. What do I do with this? How am I going to swallow this, Jesus? Jesus is saying, you aren't my disciple without an emotional affection, prioritizing. I am all. I want all of you. Your whole heart is mine. It's not just about being more important. He wants to be everything. And he's offering to us, right, in this moment, that sort of love, that sort of privileged relationship with him. One illustration I read this week, even right now, right, in the light of day, the sun is out, it's not raining anymore, we're kind of tired of the gray days we had the last couple, right? Sun is out. If you walk outside and you look up, you will see no stars. But not because they aren't shining. The stars are shining. The stars are present. Even right now, even in the light of day, right? The stars are out there. But what can't we do? We can't see them. Why? Because the sun is so bright, so spectacular, so glorious, so overwhelming and overpowering that we can't see the stars. And that's what Jesus is asking for. It's not that those things don't exist. It's not that we don't have a spouse, we don't have moms, we don't have dads, we don't have brothers. It's not that they're not shiny. It's not that they're not valuable or important. But it's that in comparison to the brightness and the glory and the spectacularness of Jesus, they don't even show up. This isn't just make Jesus first. This isn't even just doing our duty, right? Jesus is asking, commanding, love me. It's not just one more thing we add on. It is the only thing. It isn't the icing on the cake. It's the oxygen that we breathe. Now, some of us, right, when we say something like, hate your parents, can we be honest with one another? For some of us in the room, that's not that hard. Some of us in the room have bad parents. Some of us in the room have had bad spouses. Some of us in the room have kids that we would never want to, in the light of day, around any sort of, body that would remember, admit it. But what we feel for them is not always love. We've got screwed up relationships with some of the people on that list, right? For some of us, it's people even inside of this room. It's not that great of a stretch to hate them. And maybe it's because we've been disappointed by them. Maybe it's because we've been the one doing the disappointing things. And that sense of failure, that sense of brokenness, that sense of relational conflict and stress and strife, we live with it. We live with it every day. Some of us, even this morning, are just in the spots of brokenness. And we're scared. We're scared because it feels like that person, maybe it's a mom, maybe it's a dad, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a kid, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's something that isn't a person, but it's a thing, right? It's money, or it's a success, or it's some achievement, and it feels like we're never going to get that. We're never going to be complete without it. And our life feels like it's on the brink. Like that thing, like it is either already gone or it is right, like the tiniest little wind blows and it would just, and we would be devastated. Why does that eat us up so much? Why is the idea of relational conflict and that we're not going to be in right relationship with these people, why is that so hard? I think for many of us, it's because that thing that isn't Jesus has become too important. That thing, that person has us by the throat, controls our life, and it feels like even the inflow of oxygen, and it just, we're devastated at sort of its every whim and every motion and every text message and phone call and lack thereof, and every holiday that person didn't come or they did come and responded this way, and we're undone. Where do we find freedom from that? Sometimes, right, for some of us, again, if we're honest, we've moved from sort of this, we've become active haters. We've taken, right, and we've gone, okay, I can show this person open animosity and open disrespect and frustration and anger, and I can pour that out. We can blame them. Maybe they are idiots. Maybe they were bad parents. Maybe they had their own issues and their abuses and their stuff, and they rejected me, and they're not worth my, right? And so we try to protect ourselves. We try to throw up these barriers and go, I'm just going to hate them so that they don't affect me. But what we're doing is killing our own heart, right? We're numbing ourselves in bitterness and anger and callousness. We believe that somehow if we diminish our passion and our care, if we harden our hearts, then I'll be unaffected by these things over here. And what Jesus says is that's not the solution. If we want to move from coward to courageous, bitter to sweet, tossed about to peaceful, we have to allow the love of Jesus to overwhelm. See, the problem isn't that we are loving these other things too much, it's that we love Jesus too little. The very essence, the very foundation of discipleship is hating everything but Jesus. That when I love Jesus with all that I am, comparatively, it looks like hate for everything else. We make Jesus our Rachel, our one and only. And in that, we've received, right, his love for us. Being a disciple, hating is deeply emotional as we try to put him first. So how do I do it? I mean, that sounds, right? I mean, okay, how do I do it? How do I whip this up? Where's the love button? What's Jesus' love language, right? I know my wife, if I want to love her better, maybe I've got to buy her a gift, or I've got to find an act of service, or I write her a nice note. Like, how do I love Jesus? Bite number 4. Hating is completely positional. Verse number 27, back to the text. Well, let's start at 26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Verse 27, whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Notice what Jesus doesn't say. Jesus doesn't say, pick up my teaching. He doesn't say, pick up the law. He doesn't say, pick up my example or pick up my advice. Because let me tell you something. If you hear that, if that's how you think loving Jesus comes, you will be crushed under the weight of it. You lack the ability to carry those things. You can't carry the law. You can't carry his example. It was too perfect. Those things would crush us if we tried. Right? Just try. Just try. Just try and go 15 minutes without an impure thought. Try and go an hour without some level of jealousy. Try and go 24 hours without exaggerating some truth. Jesus says, take up the cross. Now, on one level, right, when we hear that, it feels like, I'm not sure this is better. First, I'm supposed to hate my mom and my dad and my brothers and my sisters and my spouse and my kids and my whole life. Like, I'm supposed to hate all of that stuff. And you want me to pick up this grand implement of death. Boy, following Jesus sounds spectacular and good. It might even sound worse than trying to keep the law. Who carries crosses? In this day, who, when you saw somebody carrying a cross, who were they? They were always criminals. They were condemned people. They were the people that had already, right, they'd already been in front of the judge. They'd already been found guilty and condemned. They were the criminals. So what's Jesus asking us to do? Chew on this, right? Here's the bite. Chew on this. What criminal is he asking us to identify with? What's he saying to us when we're called to pick up our cross? We're supposed to be putting ourselves in the place, in the way with the criminal. Jesus is again saying to us the essence of discipleship. Hate everything but Jesus, and we do that when we realize that positionally Jesus died. Jesus carried his cross for who? For you and for me. So when we're picking up our cross, what are we saying? Jesus already died. Jesus' death is my death. Jesus crushed was my crushing. Jesus being beaten and bloodied was my being beaten and bloodied. Colossians chapter 3, verse 2, set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are here on earth. For you, verse 3, have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Our lives, right now, our cross is his cross. We died with Jesus on the cross. We were buried with him. When he rose to life, we were risen back to life. I was doing another baptism interview this week, and we were having that conversation. The reason, right, when we do baptisms and we take someone, we put them under the water and we bring them back up out, what are we doing? We're giving thus the congregation the picture that this person is identifying, is putting themselves in Jesus, and they're like he was died, buried, and now risen back to life. We're identifying that Jesus did that work for us. That is now our life, the life that he offers. We died with Christ on the cross. Luke 9, Jesus says what? Take up your cross daily. We have an ongoing need. Jesus knows that we are, quite frankly, stupid and forgetful. Proverbs says we're like dogs who return to our own vomit. We need every day, pick it up. Remind yourself. Identify again. Francie, read for us, right? The Lord's Prayer. Our daily bread, our daily sustenance, our daily reminder that Jesus is our all in all. His mercies are new every day. And if we identify with Jesus, and if identifying with Jesus means that I've already died to my sins, then we no longer have anything to prove. We're already accepted. We're already now identified. We already, when the Father looks at us, he no longer sees sinful you. He now sees Jesus. We are literally in the shadow of the cross. They call it the great exchange, right? We gave Jesus all of our sinfulness and our brokenness, not just in the moment, but our whole life of sinfulness and brokenness. And when he died on the cross, that died with him. So that now the Father doesn't see Jerry and his stupidity, and there's plenty of it. But he sees crucified Jesus, welcomed Son, so we can take up the cross. It means we can live lives of sacrifice, right? We can live lives of thrill and joy and trouble and pain and life. And we can go, Jesus is my example and I want to live in his sort of way. But we do it out of the fullness of what he has done for us. We do it with full hearts. We're loved in totality and completeness, exactly as we are. Discipleship is emotional because it's positional. Because the thing that we need, the need to be loved and accepted for who we really are, took place at the cross. We love and live out of emotional wealth because we have been identified with Jesus in his death. The second half of 26, verse 26 here in Luke. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. This isn't self-loathing. See, self-loathing, that self-hatred, is really being self-centered. It's an ongoing, right? It's the flip side of being self-absorbed. What I think about me and my hating myself is just self-centeredness, our own needs and our own wants and even our own failures. And what Jesus is calling us to is ego crucifixion. That we take us and we set us aside. We forget ourselves. We no longer live to prove we're hid in him, we're identified as his, the truest thing about us. Hear me. The truest thing about us is that we're his. That's what being a follower of Jesus means. That no matter what anybody else thinks, the truest thing, no matter what our sexuality is, the truest thing, no matter our marital status, the truest thing is, are we in Christ? Here we go, last bite, big elephant. Hating is unconditional. Now, it may feel a little at this stage redundant to say that, but in case I haven't been clear. The picture that Jesus gives to us, right? Taking up our cross. Do you know what never happened to somebody who took up a cross? They didn't ever come back. It was a death sentence. You didn't get to pick up your cross and take 93 steps and go, guys, this is not working for me today. So I'll be back tomorrow and maybe we'll try this again. And I got this far and that looks really like the hill's too tall and I don't have my good bare feet on today. That's not how it ever worked. When you took up your cross, it was because you were condemned. It was because your life was over. Isn't it crazy? I'm sure you've heard somebody say it before, but it is crazy to me that the enduring symbol of a follower of Jesus is the implement of his death, the cross. The very form, the very picture of his torture and death. Anybody who picked up a cross was condemned. Their fate was determined. Their independence was gone, right? This is final. This is unconditional. You're going to your death. This passage, hate your father and your mother and your brothers and your sisters and your spouse and your kids and even your own life. It wasn't just subversive to first century culture. This is subversive, right? This is contradictory to our culture today. For some of us, right, there is a clear idol of family in our world and community. The idea, right, that we've got our spouse and our kids, right? For some of us, the circle is closer. For some of us, it's acceptable to, sort of hate your mom and your dad, and it's acceptable to hate maybe your brothers and sisters. And we've got our own spouse and our own kids and our worlds, and we close our garage doors every night when we come home, and we just, us four and no more. But it's just as subversive to that idea. Jesus' call to us to hate those things in comparison to the way that we love him. And so maybe you're somebody in singleness, and I think the church has sort of historically done a sort of bad job of valuing singleness. I think Jesus' command here is that being single is okay. That's part of it. It is acceptable. There is not this idol, this thing that until you get these family out there somewhere, that somehow your life is incomplete. But I think it's every bit as subversive, every bit as damning, if you will, of our culture's strong call to personal independence and self-fulfillment. Our raw individualism. Because we don't just hate all of the out theres, but even our own life, even our own priorities are being put to death. Jesus is our all in all. And followers of his are marching with him, crosses picked up in his footsteps, under the shadow of his cross, no longer choosing our own steps, following wherever he leads. And a cross life is a promise, but not the promise that many of us were told. So often, right? I mean, I think we've told people, if you'll just come inside, if you'll just be a follower of Jesus, it'll get better. Your marriage will get better and your life will get better. What pictures does Jesus use? He's like, you're picking up a cross. You're marching to death. There will be trouble. This will be hard. There will be bad days. And when you follow a guy with no home and no retirement, who was abandoned by his friend and murdered by his enemies, somebody who tries to sell you some other version, I think, is lying to you. But he calls us to unconditional following. He calls us to a life where nobody else is even in second place. Anytime we try to follow him with condition, it isn't actually following. That isn't obedience. When we give Jesus, okay, but if you don't, that's not following. Following Jesus is the deciding factor for the disciple, right? And hear me, friends, that is everything. Job, family, kids, retirement, bank accounts, vacations, your whole life. Jesus is the sun. And all that other stuff is stars on bright days. You should be asking yourself, how do I ever do that? Swallowing this last bite, your question should be, how would I ever do that? I can never follow that well. I can never do it. If you'll let me, here's the spoon lick at the end. At my house, we really like peanut butter. Okay, I really like peanut butter. And I like to take scoops of peanut butter. That's like my thing. I get a scoop of peanut butter and I sit in a chair and watch a TV show. And there's always that little tiny little bit, sort of, because it's kind of dried out and it's a little crusty at the end. And I hold it down and I let the dogs lick the tail end of the spoon. This is the tail end, friends. The spoon lick at the end of today's eating of an elephant. Hating is gradual. It's interesting to me. I think that God doesn't believe in coincidences, and I don't want to wander us down too far into that hole, but I think it's no accident that Jesus' own death was cross. And I think it's no accident that a death on the cross is a gradual thing. There's a march to it. And there's a suffocation. It's not electrocution. It's not a firing line. It's not a noose with a jerk at the end. A cruciform life is a gradual, progressive death, and I believe that is true for us. And I believe every day His mercies are new, and we get back up and we go, here are the ways that I failed, and I confess it, Father, but you are my all. And today you get all of me. And we're going to give it to Him day after day after day. Let's pray. Would you give us, Father? Father, would you respond? Would you move in? Would you be our dad? Father, today, every one of us, if we're listening, there's been a point, there's been a moment along as we've been preaching that we've been pricked, that we've been touched, that the bite felt too big and we couldn't swallow it and it was too much. Father, I'm going to guess that there are people here even this morning who feel like this whole thing, the whole elephant, just sounds unreasonable. Feels like it's too much. You're asking too much. You've got to be some weird fanatic. You got to be some crazy person who would ever try to follow Jesus like this. And Father, maybe there's others in the room and they're overwhelmed, they're despondent, they're crushed underneath it, because in spite of the fact that we can go, this is we're identifying into Jesus, we get His death, we didn't even have to do the work. But some of us in the room, we don't even get what that means yet. It's just a concept. Father, and because of that, this whole thing, I think sometimes can just feel overwhelming and crushing. Father, maybe there's others here who we're just not moved at all. For some of us, it's because we've tried it. We did that when we were younger. We did that when we were teenagers. We did that in our 20s. And we found it too hard. And we understand that the idea of an emotional relationship, that cost feels too great. Father, I pray that in this moment, your Spirit would move. That it would come in. That it would inject us in our heart. That it would pierce through the calluses and the bitterness and the disappointment and the overwhelmedness that we might even be sitting here with at this very moment. And that your love would become the truest thing. That a Jesus who would pursue us to the point of death, to the taking up of a cross, that Jesus' love for us would flood in, and that following you would be the thing most natural to us. That our whole lives, every piece of us, would be yours. We pray it in the name of that Jesus. Amen.